tired of feeling unheard in your relationships. You speak, you cry, you plead. And all you get back is silence. A deafening, cold silence that cuts deeper than words ever could. It's not just that he isn't speaking, it's that he doesn't seem to care that you are. But is he really ignoring you to hurt you, or is something deeper happening beneath that silence? What if I told you that sometimes silence isn't just an act of cruelty? Sometimes it's a cry for clarity. Sometimes it's his version of screaming, except the scream echoes inside his own head. And other times, it's a power play, a way to control, to punish, to make you small. And if you don't learn to recognize the difference, you'll find yourself trapped in a relationship where your voice dies quietly. Not because you stopped talking, but because you stopped being heard. This is not just about men. This is not just about women. This is about what happens when love meets fear, when ego meets emotion, and when silence becomes louder than truth. So I want you to ask yourself right now, when was the last time his silence made you question your worth? Not just what you said, not just the argument, but you, your value, your sanity, your right to feel. Because silence doesn't always happen in anger. Sometimes it's after intimacy. Sometimes it's after you were vulnerable. Sometimes it's when you needed him most. But here's the truth. The silent treatment isn't about silence. It's about power. And today, we're going to break it down. When it's toxic, when it's strategic, and when you must walk away, not quietly, but powerfully. We're going to go deep into the psychology, the philosophy, the emotion. And by the end of this journey, you will never be afraid of silence again. Let's begin. I remember a woman once telling me that silence felt worse than shouting. She said, "At least when he yells, I know he's feeling something. When he's silent, it's like I'm invisible." And I knew exactly what she meant. Because silence, when weaponized, is not peace. It's emotional abandonment. It's exile in your own relationship. But let's be honest, the silent treatment has been romanticized and vilified in equal measure. Some say it's childish. Others say it's necessary. But what's the real truth? Let's define it clearly. The silent treatment is not just taking a break. It's not needing space. It's not emotional self-regulation. It's a conscious withdrawal of communication with the intent to punish, confuse, or assert control. It's when someone says, "You don't get access to me until you behave the way I want you to." It's not just silence. It's silence with consequences. And here's why that hurts so deeply. Because connection is oxygen. And when someone who means the world to you decides to hold their words hostage, they're cutting off your air supply. But this is where it gets complicated. Because sometimes silence can be wise. Sometimes silence isn't about punishment, it's about preservation. Sometimes a man goes silent not because he's trying to hurt you, but because he doesn't know how to stay without breaking something. He might be afraid that his words will make things worse. He might be emotionally overwhelmed, shut down by years of being told, men don't cry. Men don't explain. Men just handle it. He might be going silent because he doesn't know how to fight fair. But that doesn't mean it's okay, because silence without communication is still abandonment. Even if it's not malicious, it's still destructive. And here's where the emotional toll begins. You start overthinking. You start blaming yourself. You relive every word you said, every facial expression you made, every time you were too emotional or too needy or too much. You start to believe you are the problem, not the silence. That's how emotional control works. It's not loud. It's not obvious. It's subtle. It's slow. It convinces you to mute your truth for the sake of keeping peace, even if it means losing yourself. Let me take you back to a real moment, one that changed everything for a woman named Elise. She was dating a man who would go completely silent after every disagreement, not for hours, not for a night, but for days. She would text, no response. She would call straight to voicemail. She would cry alone. At first, she told herself, he just needs space. Then, he's just not good with emotions. Then, maybe I was too pushy. But eventually, she realized this wasn't about space. This was about control. Because every time he came back, she would apologize. Every time he returned, he'd act like nothing happened. And she would follow, just grateful that he wasn't mad anymore. That's not love. That's emotional conditioning. But Elise did something radical. One day, after yet another silent episode, she didn't chase. She didn't text. She didn't beg. She went silent too, not to play the same game, but to break it. And when he came back, she didn't welcome him with open arms. She welcomed him with boundaries. She said, if you disappear again without communicating, I won't be here when you return. That was the moment the dynamic changed. Because silence only holds power when it's met with fear, when it's met with self-respect. It shatters. So how do you know if a man's silence is a toxic tactic or a temporary retreat? It starts with asking, does his silence feel like a timeout or a punishment? Does he come back and communicate, or come back like nothing happened? Do you feel emotionally safer afterward or more afraid? Because healthy silence looks like, I need space to calm down, but I still love you. I don't want to say something I'll regret, so I'm taking a break. This isn't goodbye. This is a pause. But toxic silence sounds like nothing. It offers no explanation, no reassurance, no closure. It leaves you drowning in ambiguity. Now let's go deeper, not just psychologically, but philosophically. Silence in its purest form is sacred. Think of monks, sages, ancient philosophers. Silence was used for reflection, wisdom, and inner clarity. But in relationships, silence without presence is cruelty. Because the purpose of relationship is not just physical proximity. It's emotional availability. So what happens when silence replaces communication? It erodes the foundation of connection. It creates walls where there should be bridges. It teaches you to tiptoe, to guess, to shrink. And love should never require you to shrink to fit inside someone else's emotional void. Let's not sugarcoat it. Some men use silence because it works, because it gets results, because it keeps you hooked, because you equate his return with relief, even if he never apologizes. And that creates a dangerous cycle. He disappears, you panic, he returns, you forgive, and nothing changes. But it's time for that to change. It's time for you to change. Because you can't control whether he talks, but you can control whether you tolerate the silence. You see, silence is not inherently evil, but how it's used, why it's used, and what happens after it's used tells you everything about the emotional health of the relationship. Let's go deeper now into when the silent treatment doesn't work and why. Because there's a common trap many fall into, thinking that silence means maturity. But here's the truth most people don't want to say out loud. Silence without intention is avoidance. Silence without explanation is emotional starvation. Silence without accountability is cowardice. And when a man uses the silent treatment in this way, disappearing instead of discussing, freezing you out instead of facing the fire, what he's really doing is stalling your growth as a couple. He's building walls of resentment instead of building bridges of resolution. It might feel like the silence keeps things peaceful, but really, it just buries the conflict deeper into your nervous system. Because when you go days without resolution, your brain doesn't forget. It stores every unanswered text, every unanswered look, every conversation you had with yourself while he vanished. And then one day, he returns like nothing happened. But you're no longer the same woman. You're more guarded now, more careful, more anxious. You laugh a little less. You ask for a little less. You settle a little more. And this is how emotional distance becomes emotional disconnection. Not with one explosion, but with 100 quiet withdrawals. Let me tell you a story from history that mirrors this exact emotional pattern. One you might not expect. During the Cold War, the two most powerful nations on Earth, the United States and the Soviet Union, didn't fight each other directly. Instead, they engaged in strategic silence. No bullets, no bombs, just threats, tension, and complete emotional freeze. But that silence, it didn't make the world safer, it made it more dangerous. Because when communication stops, assumptions take over. And assumptions, when left unchecked, become enemies of peace. It's the same in relationships. When your partner shuts down and stops talking, you don't just sit in stillness. Your mind fills the silence with fears, with interpretations, with emotional self-blame. You start wondering, did I push too hard? Did I mess everything up? Is he time to leave? And worst of all, am I lovable when I'm not convenient? And this is how the silent treatment becomes not just a tool of control, but a mirror reflecting your deepest wounds. That's why the silent treatment is so emotionally destructive when misused, because it opens the door for self-abandonment. You start silencing yourself just to keep him from silencing you again. You swallow your truth. You shrink your needs. You tiptoe around your own heart. But real love doesn't require silence. It requires presence, even in conflict, especially in conflict. Now, that doesn't mean silence is always wrong, because here's the twist. When used intentionally, silence can be one of the most powerful communication tools in your emotional arsenal. But here's the key. Silence should be strategic, not passive-aggressive. Let me explain. There are times when going silent is not a punishment, but a form of self-protection. Moments when you know that continuing to talk will only escalate the argument. Moments when you're too overwhelmed to respond with clarity. Moments when your nervous system is screaming, pause, or will both say something we'll regret. This is when silence becomes sacred, when it gives both people time to cool down, to process, to reflect, not to punish, but to reset. But even this kind of silence requires one thing most people never do: clear communication before the silence begins. That might sound ironic, communicating before being silent, but that's what separates emotional maturity from manipulation. It's the difference between saying, "I need space to calm down, but I'll talk to you later. I just need a moment," versus disappearing with no explanation. One builds trust, the other destroys it. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of silence that had no closure, you know how damaging that vacuum feels. So, how can you tell when the silent treatment is strategic versus when it's destructive? Here are a few powerful truths. Strategic silence is temporary. It's time limited. It's not used to punish, but to pause. There's a difference between taking space to breathe and taking silence as revenge. Strategic silence is communicated. Even a short text like, "I need a few hours to clear my head, but I care and will talk soon," can be the difference between safety and suffering. Strategic silence leads back to connection. It's not used to avoid the issue. It's used to prepare for a healthier conversation later. Silence that ends in open dialogue is healthy. Silence that ends in denial or dismissal is not. Now let's bring this to your real life. Maybe you're dating a man who goes silent when things get hard. Or maybe you're in a relationship where the cycle repeats. He withdraws, you chase, he returns, you forgive. How do you break this pattern? The answer begins with boundaries. Because the problem isn't just that he's silent. The problem is that you've made silence the price you're willing to pay to stay. But no relationship can thrive when emotional punishment is allowed to exist unchecked. You need to make it clear, not with ultimatums, not with rage, but with certainty, that communication is non-negotiable. Try this. I understand if you need space, but disappearing without communicating isn't something I can keep accepting. I want to work through things, but I need to feel safe too. That's not drama. That's not being controlling. That's emotional self-respect. And it might feel terrifying at first because every time you enforce a boundary, you risk someone walking away. But here's the truth you need to hold close. If a man leaves because you asked for clarity, he was never here to grow with you in the first place. And if he stays, but keeps testing your silence threshold, then he's not trying to resolve things. He's trying to condition you. But when a man truly cares, your boundary won't scare him. It'll guide him. Because emotionally available men don't run from hard conversations. They lean into them, even if awkwardly, even if imperfectly. You're not asking for perfection. You're asking for presence. Let's go back to history for a moment. In ancient Greece, there was a philosopher named Epictetus. He said, "Why have two ears and one mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak?" Powerful, right? But silence is not the same as listening. And men who use silence as a wall are not listening. They're hiding. The real communication begins after the silence ends. When both people come to the table, maybe bruised, maybe shaken, but willing to speak and to hear. And you deserve that. Not just love that feels good when things are easy, but love that shows up when things are hard. So what happens now? You've seen the truth. The silent treatment is not just silence, it's a message. Sometimes a cry for help, sometimes a dagger, sometimes a door. But here's what it should never be again, a mystery. And yet, most women stay stuck in that mystery because they're too afraid to name what's happening. They give it new words. He just needs space. He's overwhelmed. I don't want to pressure him. He'll come around. But silence is never neutral. It's always communicating something. And if you don't clarify what that something is, it starts to erode the very foundation of your self-worth. Because here's the raw truth no one tells you. You can get used to emotional starvation. You can get used to guessing. You can get used to being invisible. You'll dress it up with words like independence or empathy. But deep down, you're quietly begging for crumbs of connection. And here's the worst part. Over time, you start silencing yourself. You stop asking hard questions. You avoid bringing up what hurts. You walk on emotional eggshells because you fear triggering his next retreat. But a relationship where your voice is a threat to his comfort is not a relationship. It's an emotional dictatorship. Let's pause here. I want you to take a breath because this might hurt. But it's the kind of hurt that heals. If you're constantly afraid of his silence, you're not in love. You're in survival. And survival will never bring you peace. So how do we break this cycle? How do we stop fearing silence and start using it as a tool for empowerment, not punishment? It starts with you. It starts with reclaiming your voice. Not just the words you say out loud, but the truth you whisper to yourself when no one's listening. Let's go into real strategy now. Not theory, not wishful thinking, real steps. Number one is define what silence means in your relationship. This sounds simple, but it's radical because most people never talk about it. They wait until it happens, and by then it's too late. You need to define together what healthy silence looks like. Sit down with your partner and say something like, I know we're going to have hard moments, and I respect that sometimes we both need space. But can we agree on how we'll handle those times so it feels safe for both of us? Now watch what happens. If he shuts down even in that conversation, you've got your answer. He's not interested in emotional maturity. He's interested in control. But if he leans in, even awkwardly, you've got something you can work with. Because emotional maturity isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Number 2 is set a time limit on silence. The worst part of the silent treatment is the not knowing. You don't know if it's a break or a breakup. You don't know if he's gone for hours or forever. That uncertainty creates emotional chaos. So set a boundary. I'm okay with us taking space if things get heated, but I need to know you'll check in after a few hours or by the next day. That kind of reassurance helps me feel safe. And here's the kicker. You need to do the same. If you go silent, you owe that communication too, not because you're weak, but because you're accountable. Mutual respect. That's the goal. Number 3 is use silence as a tool, not a weapon. There's a huge difference between saying, I need a moment to process this, and saying, nothing. Silence becomes toxic when it's used to provoke, punish, or push the other person into submission. But silence becomes powerful when it's used to de-escalate, reset, and return to connection. Here's what it might sound like. I'm too hurt to talk clearly right now. I don't want to lash out, so I need space. But I care about us, and I want to revisit this when I can speak from love, not pain. That sentence, it can save a relationship, because it's not silence that breaks people. It's silence that pretends not to care. Number 4 is don't chase the silence. Reflect on it. If he goes silent on you without any communication, you have a choice. You can chase him, send texts, call repeatedly, beg for closure. Or you can pause and ask yourself, what is this silence teaching me about him and about me? Does it teach you that he shuts down when things get hard? That he punishes instead of partners? That he doesn't care how it impacts you? Or does it teach you something even deeper? That you've been tolerating this for far too long and calling it love. There's no clarity in chasing, only exhaustion. But in reflection, you get your power back. Because here's the truth that might sting today, but free you tomorrow. If someone's silence makes you forget your value, it's time to walk away. Not toward them, but back to yourself. Let me tell you about a woman named Daria. She spent years in a relationship with a man who went silent after every disagreement. He wouldn't just shut down. He would vanish. No messages, no calls, no words. The first time it happened, she was devastated. The 10th time, she blamed herself. But the last time, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She packed her bags because she realized she didn't need someone who came back with silence. She needed someone who came back with truth. And that's what you deserve too. Not someone who disappears to punish you, but someone who pauses to protect both of you. not someone who uses silence as a sword, but someone who uses it as a shield for healing. Number 5 is create a self-soothing plan for when silence happens. Because here's the truth. Even if you're doing all the right things, people will still disappoint you. They'll still shut down sometimes. They'll still go silent, intentionally or unintentionally. And when that happens, you need to have yourself. So create a ritual journaling your emotions, talking to a trusted friend, not someone who judges you, but someone who reminds you of your strength. Listening to music that reminds you of who you were before the relationship. Walking, meditating, crying, whatever helps you feel without breaking, because silence doesn't have to equal suffering. It can equal stillness, clarity, growth, but only if you stop letting someone else's absence make you abandon yourself. Let's land this with something you'll remember. Silence is a language, but just like any language, it can be used to heal or to harm. When used wisely, silence says, "I care too much to speak from my wounds." When used recklessly, silence says, "I don't care enough to speak at all." And if someone shows you again and again that their silence is their weapon, not their wound, you don't have to fight back. You just have to leave the battlefield. Because there is someone out there who will sit with your messy, unfiltered truth. Someone who will say, "Tell me what's wrong," not, "You're too emotional." Someone who will listen, even when it's hard, because connection matters more than ego. But to find that person, you have to stop tolerating emotional withdrawal as normal. You have to raise your standards. And that begins with a single, powerful truth. Your voice is sacred. Your feelings are valid. And anyone who makes you question that through silence, shame, or dismissal does not belong in the center of your heart. Let them go quiet. You speak. You rise. You reclaim your space, because the right relationship doesn't fear your voice. It makes room for it. Thank you for watching. If this touched you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you've been on the receiving end of the silent treatment, drop a comment below and tell us, what did you learn and what are you reclaiming now? You are not alone. You are not too much, and you never have to beg to be heard again. This was Magnetic Hearts, and your voice, it's not just welcome here, it's powerful.